my pocket. I got my clearance lights. I will make sure they're properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged, and they're amber in color. Got my convex mirror. I'll make sure it's properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged. Got my headlights. They work as my turn signals, forward flashes, low beams and high beams. They're properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged. I'll make sure my turn signals and forward flashes are amber in color. Looking underneath the truck, I don't see any puddles or leaks, and my truck is not leaning to either side. Up to the side of the engine, I inspect all my hoses. I'll make sure they're all properly mounted. There's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and I don't hear any leaks. I don't see any leaks. Got my coolant reservoir. I'll make sure it's properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged, not leaking any coolant. And I'll make sure it's up to the proper level, and I will not touch the cap when it's hot. Got my alternator. I'll make sure it's properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged, and it's belt driven. Got my alternator belt. I'll make sure there's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. It's properly mounted. There's no more than 3/4 inches of play at the center. Got my water pump. Make sure it's properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged, and not leaking any coolant. It's also belt driven. Checking all my hoses on the other side. Make sure they're properly mounted. There's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and I don't hear any leaks. Got my air compressor. I'll make sure it's properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged, and not leaking any air. I don't hear any air. It is gear driven. Got my oil dipstick. I'll make sure it's properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged, not leaking any oil. To check the proper level, I will pull it out, clean it, put it back in, and pull it back out. Then I check the proper level, put it back in. Got my power steering reservoir. Make sure it's properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged, not leaking any power steering. I'll make sure it's up to the proper level. Got my power steering box. Make sure it's properly mounted, not leaking any power steering, not cracked, broken, or damaged, and gear driven. Got my power steering linkage. I'll make sure it's properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged. It's not missing any castle nuts or cotter keys. Got my spring mount. I'll make sure it's properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged. It doesn't have any damaged bushings. Got my spring leaf spring. Make sure it's properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged, not shifted. Got my U-bolts. Make sure they're properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged, not missing any parts. Got my shock absorber. Make sure it's properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged, not leaking any hydraulic fluid. Got my brake hose and my brake line. Make sure they're properly mounted. They don't have any abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and they're not leaking. I don't hear any leaks. Got my brake chamber. Make sure it's properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged. It's not leaking any air. I don't hear any leaks. Got my push rod and slack adjuster. When my brakes are released, I pull it. If it moves an inch or more, it needs adjustment. 2 inches or more, it's out of service. Got my brake drum. It doesn't have any damages or hole, and it's free of debris like oil or grease. Got my brake lining. Make sure it doesn't have less than 1/4 inch. Make sure it's not less than 1/4 inch thin. Got my rim inside and my rim outside. I'll make sure they're properly mounted. They're not cracked, broken, or damaged. They don't have any illegal repairs. Got my tire on the sides and the top. Make sure it's properly mounted around the rim, inside and out. There's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. There's no leaks. I don't hear any leaks. It's evenly worn on the sides and the top, and my thread length cannot be less than 432. Got my lug nuts. They're all properly mounted, none missing. There's no indications of looseness like shiny thread or rusty metal. Got my hub seal. Make sure it's properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged, not leaking any oil or grease. If it had a side glass, I'll make sure it's up to the proper level. Got my valve stem. Make sure it's properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged. It's not leaking any air. I don't hear any air, and the cap is pressing. With a tire pressure gauge, I will make sure my tire pressure is 90 to 100 psi or up to manufacturer's specs. Got my steps. Make sure they're properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged, free of debris like oil or grease. Got my fuel tank. Make sure there's no damages or holes, no leaks. It's properly mounted to the tractor frame. Got my cap. Make sure it's properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged. And I'll make sure inside I have the safety pin and the rubber seal in good condition. Got my fuel line and my fuel hose properly mounted. There's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. There's no leak in the fuel. My door opens and closes properly. My hinges are properly mounted. They're not cracked, broken, or damaged. My rubber seals inside and outside, they're properly mounted. They don't have any abrasions, bulges, or cuts. Got my lines, air lines, and electrical lines. Make sure they're all properly mounted to the fittings, plugs, and glad hands. There's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. There's no leaks. I don't hear any leaks. They're not tangled, and none of them are hanging on the catwalk. Got my catwalk steps and my catwalk. Make sure they're properly mounted. They're not cracked, broken, or damaged, and they're free of debris like oil or grease. Got my tractor frame. I'll make sure it's properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged, no illegal welds. Got my drive shaft. Make sure it's properly mounted, not bent, broken, or damaged, and my couplings are free of debris and fully greased. Got the bolt head. Make sure there's no damages or holes and no missing rivets. Got my glat hands. Make sure they're properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged. I don't hear any leaks, and my rubber seals are in good conditions. They don't have any abrasion, bulges, or cuts, and I don't hear any leaks from them either. The side of the trailer, no damages, no holes, no missing rivets, and my DOT tape all present all the way to the back of the trailer in good condition. Got my clearance lights. Make sure they're properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged, and they're amber in color. Got my splash guard. Make sure it's properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged. Got my spring mount, properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged, no damaged bushings. Spring leaf, properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged, not shifted. U-bolts, properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged, not missing any parts. Shock absorber, properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged, not leaking in hydraulic fluid. Airbag mount, make sure it's properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged, and the airbag is properly mounted. There's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and there's no leaks. I don't hear any leaks. I don't have a torque on, so I go to my brake system. My brake line and brake hose, make sure they're properly mounted. There's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and there's no leaks. I don't hear any leaks. Brake chamber properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged, no leaks. I don't hear any leaks. Push rod and slack adjuster. When my brakes are released, I pull it. If it moves an inch or more, it needs adjustment. 2 inches or more, it's out of service. Brake drum, no damages, no holes, free of debris like oil or grease. Brake lining, no less than a 1/4 inch thin. My butt rim, inside, in the middle, and outside, properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged, no illegal repairs, and in the middle is free of debris, and my tires are evenly spaced and centered. My tires, both of them, properly mounted around my butt rim. There's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. There's no leaks. I don't hear any leaks. They're all evenly worn, inside, outside, and on the top. And my thread cannot be less than 232. My lug nuts, make sure they're all properly mounted, not missing, not cracked, broken, or damaged, not showing indications of looseness like shiny thread or rusty metal. Axle seal, make sure it's properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged, not leaking any grease or oil. If it had a side glass, I would check the belt. I'll make sure it's up to the proper level. Got my valve stems, inside and outside. Make sure they're properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged, not leaking any air. I don't hear any air, any leaks. And I got both of my caps present. To check the tire pressure, I will get a tire pressure gauge. Make sure my air pressure is 90 to 100 psi or manufacturer's specs. Got my mud flap, it's properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged, at least 6 to 8 inches off the floor. Got my 5th wheel release arm. I'll make sure it's properly mounted with the safety pin, not cracked, broken, or damaged. Go over here now. Got my 5th wheel platform. I'll make sure it's properly mounted, not missing any parts, not cracked, broken, or damaged. Got my 5th wheel skid plate. Make sure it's properly mounted on the platform, not cracked, broken, or damaged, and fully greased. Got my apron. I'll make sure there's no damages or holes, properly mounted on the 5th wheel skid plate, and there's no gap in between my 5th wheel skid plate and my apron. Got my kingpin inside. It's properly mounted inside the 5th wheel skid plate. It's not bent, broken, or damaged. Got my locking jaws. Make sure they're properly mounted around the shaft of my kingpin. Not cracked, broken, or damaged. Got my cross members. Make sure they're properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged. Supporting my floor. Got my floor. There's no damages or holes. Got my lights. They work as my tail lights, brake lights, turn signals, and 4-way flashes. Properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged, red in color. Got my reverse light. Make sure it's properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged, white in color. Come out. I have enough space in between my tractor and my landing gear for turning. My landing gear. Make sure it's properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or damaged. There's no illegal repairs, and it's fully braked. My crank handle. Make sure it's properly mounted in the safe position, not cracked, broken, or damaged. Turn signal forward. 4-way flashers. Marker light, properly mounted, not fabric and damage, amber in color. Marker light, properly mounted, not fabric and damage, amber in color. I would check all my cross members, make sure they're all properly mounted, supporting my floor. Got my hoses. I'll make sure they're properly mounted. I don't hear any there's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. I don't hear any leaks. They should be at least 16 to 18 inches off the floor. Got my tandem. Make sure it's properly mounted, not fabric and damage, no illegal repairs. Got my tandem release arm. Make sure it's properly mounted with the safety pin, not fabric and damage. Got my spring mount. Make sure it's properly mounted, not fabric and damage. Got my torque arm, properly mounted, not fabric and damage. Torque arm bushings, not damaged. Got the airbag. Make sure it's properly mounted. There's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. I don't hear any leaks. Got a shock absorber. Properly mounted, not fabric and damage, not leaking any hydraulic fluid. I'm done with my suspension. I don't have a leaf spring. I don't have a U-bolt. So now I go to my brake hose and my brake line. They're properly mounted, no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. I don't hear any leaks. Brake chamber, properly mounted, not fabric and damage. I don't hear any leaks. Push rod and slack adjuster. When I release the trailer brakes, I pull it. If it moves an inch or more, it needs adjustment. 2 inches or more, it's out of service. Brake drum, there's no damages or holes, and it's free of debris like oil or grease. Brake lining cannot be less than a 1/4 inch thin. My butt rim inside, in the middle, and outside, they're all properly mounted, not fabric and damage, free of illegal repairs. In the middle, it's free of debris, and my tires are evenly centered. My tires, make sure they're properly mounted around my butt rim. There's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and I don't hear any leaks. They're all evenly worn, and my thread cannot be less than 232. Got my lug nuts. Make sure they're all properly mounted, not fabric and damage, not missing, not showing indications of looseness, like shiny thread or rusty metal. Got my hub seal. Make sure it's properly mounted. It's not fabric and damage. It's not leaking any oil or grease. If it had a side glass, I'll make sure it's up to the proper level. Got both of my valve springs inside and out. I'll make sure they're both properly mounted. They're not fabric and damage. I don't hear any leaks. And they both have the cap pressure. With a tire pressure gauge, I'll check the tire pressure. Make sure the tire pressure is 90 to 100 psi or up to manufacturer specs. So check.
Sure.
I would check this axle the same way I check this axle. Do you want me to speak about it? No. Pass. Mud flap. Make sure it's properly mounted, not fabric and damage, at least 6 to 8 inches off the floor. If I had an ABS light, I would speak about it. Properly mounted, not fabric and damage, amber in color. Marker light. It's properly mounted, not fabric and damage, red in color. Got my clearance lights. Make sure they're properly mounted, not fabric and damage, and they are red in color. Got my door. There's no damages or holes. Got my door latch. Make sure it's properly mounted, not fabric and damage. My door opens and closes properly. Got my lights. They work as my brake lights, tail lights, turn signals, and four-way flashes. Properly mounted, not fabric and damage, and they're red in color. Got my DOT reflector tape. Properly mounted, not damaged, visible. I'll check this side the same way I check the other side besides the exhaust system. On the exhaust system, I'll make sure it's properly mounted. It's not fabric and damage. It doesn't have any holes, and there's no leaks or indications of leaks. I am done with my pre-trip inspection.